Welcome to the Social Justice War Room, the podcast where we talk about social justice in fiction, reality, and everything in between. My guest today is an old friend from the webcomic community. He's been doing comics for many years now, and he's created his own superhero shared universe with a lot of characters across many different stories. The hub for all that is the Heroes of the World Beyond comic. Please welcome Shane Rivett. How are you doing, Shane?
I'm fine, thank you, Neil.
Yeah, so how did you start doing webcomics? Like a lot of us grew up being fans of superheroes. Very few actually went on to do the work to make our own and to make comics with them and to keep making comics with them.
Yes, well, I think when you're growing up and seeing all this merchandise around you, it kind of it becomes your life. You literally you see something like Spider-Man or Batman, and they're literally on a packet of crisps when you go to get them. They're everywhere, so they get into your mind, especially as a child. And I just think that's what happened with me and superheroes. I just naturally navigated towards them. And as far as comics go, I always saw it as a part of a bigger picture, maybe, moving on into things like animation and games. I just realized I am a traditionalist and I wanted to start out in comics, and webcomics was just easy and fun to do. So that's how it came about.
Yeah. Was there a learning curve for doing webcomics? Like, since I do them, I'm familiar with how the ease of self-publishing also means that you're responsible for pretty much everything that goes in and fixing any problems that come up in the process.
Yes. Well, I'm 6 years into this current run of webcomics that I'm doing, and I still feel like I'm learning as I go. There's so much to do and learn. There is a kind of a grind to it all where you're promoting, and there's the harsh side of webcomics, like flats and backgrounds. But I think sorry, I think I've lost the thread there.
No worries, it happens. Well, it's that
the learning curve. That was it.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I think
a strong learning curve, and there's the challenge of simply drawing the thing and how time consuming that is. And
yes,
while superheroes are considered kind of a low art form on the arbitrary scales that people judge art,
yes,
the actual creation of superhero art is incredibly complicated with the anatomy and the camera angles and the posing.
Yes. I think it's actually, sorry.
No, go on.
I think it's actually, for anybody wishing to start out in webcomics, it's a really great place to start doing superheroes, because it is, like you say, about the positionings and the anatomy, and you get to know the anatomy quite intimately when you're doing superheroes. They're stretched out in all kinds of positions, and positions that you wouldn't get even doing some kind of gymnastics comic, because these guys can be flying, they're going to be in all kinds of agony and the likes. So it's a great place to start. And I say this in a sense that when you do start a webcomic, I don't recommend doing your magnum opus straight away, because you're going to learn so many things in doing the webcomic, especially, if you're going to go down the superhero route, you learn a lot about anatomy. You'll also learn a lot about your own what you can achieve as a webcomic creator, and, learning about the social side of it as well. Like you were talking about a learning curve, there's been several, especially being autistic as well. I never feel as though I'm reaching out as much as I can, and my posts on social media can be quite sort of, I don't know. I kind of just put them out and cross my fingers, really,
Well,
and hope people like them and aren't irritated.
I think almost everyone who's been on the podcast so far is either ADHD, autistic, or in the case of me, both. So
yeah,
that should be no problem for the audience here, at least.
Yeah, sure.
One thing interesting about your comic is as Heroes of the World Beyond deals with like the beginning of a superhero world.
Yeah.
And one thing you've gotten into immediately is how much celebrity has gone into it and how many people get into it without anything resembling altruistic motivations.
Yes.
And what made you want to focus on that aspect of it?
Well, as much as we could say sort of the comic is quite high fantasy in a way, I wanted to look at motivation and what would make a person in the modern times become a superhero. And I thought about it in a kind of postmodern kind of way. You instead of creating a lot of background stories for everybody, it would be kind of like the universal that people could achieve celebrity status through being a superhero. And the idea really was to look at whether or not the action itself of being a hero is good, or the motivation behind it is good, because technically you could achieve the same outcome. And that's what interests me as I'm writing it. But as for motivations, I'm not sure if you've ever played the old DC Comics role-playing game. I found it quite stifling back in the 80s, no, in the 90s. They had you pick a motivation for your character, you know, and there was only like 5 motivations. So it was like seeking justice, family, background, death, you know, seeking fortune. And I just thought, you know, I want to mix it up, look at the world as we are now, and look at what would motivate somebody into putting on capes and tights and fighting crime.
Yeah, and it does seem like it would have kind of a fundamentally self-absorbed motivation if you're willing to like put on an elaborate costume and declare yourself a hero or a villain.
Yes.
Yeah, so
It's a double-edged sword, really, because you do have to prove yourself as a hero, but also once you do, then you get the cash reward, really. And the likes of Captain Charisma, he's very much Trumpian in style because he sells the false image to the people and reaps the rewards of that, you know?
yeah,
He's very much a
yeah,
fake kind of guy himself, you know?
you're not you're I'm based on your accent, you're on the other side of the Atlantic, I think our readers can figure out, and you've got your own Trump in Boris Johnson.
Yes. We're trying to get him out now.
I sincerely wish you the best of luck with that. But
yeah, thanks.
you're in your stories, the epicenter of all this hero activity is a city in Britain, and superheroes traditionally are very much associated with America. Is there any significant change between American and British cultures that you think would affect the way superhero cultures manifest over there?
Well, I think we're a bit too cynical for the for going full style, American style with a hero kind of concept. I think we do have a strong sense of justice over here. The you know, a lot of us normal people have. It's not without a basis of reality that we could have superheroes here. But I mean, the initial idea of Hot Web was to be some kind of reality TV show, kind of superhero thing. But then I just moved along with the whole celebrity idea, and that's how that turned out.
Yeah. I mean, I may be talking out of my ass a bit here because of my limitations as an American, but
Yeah,
it does seem like there was a tremendous amount of influence from writers from the UK on American superhero comics,
yes.
likes of Alan Moore and Grant Morrison,
Mhm.
and it well, I don't think he'd want to admit it, Garth Ennis.
Right.
And they came to it either from a very cynical place of looking at it, or a place where it was kind of outside it, where they acknowledged all the different genre trappings and tropes as that tropes instead of like an unspoken tenet of a religion. And
Right.
do you feel similarly when you approach this stuff, or have you just grown up with it, so it's all very familiar to you?
Well, I do think I'm being quite cynical, really, because for the most part, like you say, that there's no true goodness happening behind somebody wanting a career. The idea really was to take that concept and say, well, if we have these career superheroes in the world and they do actually beat up the bad guys, I mean, is it a bad thing that they're about? I mean, people love them. I mean, if you take someone like Captain Charisma, he's really selling the idea that he is a good guy. But I mean, really, he's a harsh businessman, and he's going to do some terrible things in the future. But this was the whole idea with the Trump thing. I mean, people loved the guy. I was agog at people worshiping this man, and I just thought, like, you're hypnotized by this man saying that he's some kind of messianic figure. So I kind of mixed that in with Charisma and had this kind of the people are just so blinkered by his charisma that they just can't believe that he'd ever be a bad person. But obviously there's going to be other sides saying, well, actually, I was witness to this and I saw him do that, and they'll be hushed up, So I think that is a very cynical look on superheroes.
Yeah.
Initially.
But you've also got several characters who aren't cynical. And like, you had a bunch of strips with the character Gobi, a young man who's empowered by kind of an enlightened hive mind from space.
Yes, Gobi's a very difficult hero to write for, and he's been through so many different costumes in the last few years. I've just never settled on it. I'm still changing it as we go. You might have seen in the last few comics, I've changed the costume again. I've changed it again. I've changed it again. It's working with stripes, man. I tell you, it's terrible.
Yeah. Well, that's part of the fun of comics, though, the fact that so much of this is inherently transmutable.
Yes, definitely. And I suppose you don't have that kind of franchise there that you must sell a specific image that the mainstream comics do. So you can be as creative as you like, really. But the idea behind Gobi, just getting back to him, it was another kind of motivation that goes beyond, the human motivations. That's why I brought him in from a different dimension, because I thought it'd be like, it would be the idea of an idea coming from a different place, like a higher place maybe. And Gobi works on the idea of altruistic, reciprocal altruicity or something. Yeah, that's the one. Which is you help each other and you expel energy towards each other so that you work towards a better society, and you don't. Well, it's kind of like a socialism, but it's without the idea that we're not selfish creatures. We are selfish creatures at the end of the day, So that was, like I say, he's a very complicated character.
Yeah.
So it's difficult to write for him.
I'm definitely drawn to him, and I do like that phrase reciprocal altruism, because it communicates that a lot of what seems like selflessness is ultimately just a response to the fact that we're all linked as human beings, and we all live on the same planet, and what we do affects others, so we should probably do good things instead of bad things.
Well, indeed.
And of course, we're at the hideous final form of capitalism, where it's just about extracting as much value in the short term without any consideration of long-term sustainability.
Yeah.
But on less depressing topics. So there's a lot of characters in your comic. You've definitely created a full universe. Is it
Yes.
difficult to like keep track of them all and keep all the different threads going within a
Not,
story?
not particularly. I kind of think of myself as doing the Stan Lee approach to comics. I've been told it's not, but I do believe that Stan Lee kind of made a sort of storyboard and then gave it to the artists, and then he would put the writing on afterwards. And that's kind of what I do, but I don't storyboard. I would just storyboard in my head, and I do a lot of the artwork first. Push that out there. I mean, it's one of the stumbling blocks I had to begin with. I was working from scripts, and it just wasn't happening. I was stuck in creative oblivion, and as soon as I just thought, right, well, I know this scene's going to happen. I know we're going to have Avenging Arrow, Damoiselle, and the Chrono Maggie jumping out of a helicopter into a big crowd scene. And I just thought, I'll get that done. And that's my start. And I did. And it just continued from there, you know? And so keeping it all tied together, I know where things are going. But for the most part, I also wanted to set out something that's easy to read and it's fun. It's kind of like, I see it as the Justice League cartoon, but a little bit more adult, where people are actually, you know, there are, it's not graphic, but it's seaside saucy, you know, postcard saucy kind of thing, you know. A bit titillating, but nothing serious. Anyway,
I will say, and don't take this the wrong way, you do draw a lot of butts, but you also draw a lot of different butts, different body types, and different kinds of butts. And given how much the superhero genre is basically effectively nude figures in motion, but ones that traditionally stick to a single ideal of what a good body and a good butt looks like, it is appreciated.
Honestly, I didn't know. You just alerted me to something that I do. I draw a lot of butts. That's great. The idea really was to open up into all kinds of body shapes and the like. I just, what happened was my brother and I had a selection of superheroes that we'd made up in the 90s in an old role-playing game called GURPS Supers. And I also had some previous creations that I had. And when I came into doing this webcomic, I thought to myself, well, I could make up, you know, some new characters, cyber, ninja, you know, whatever's going these days, you know, keep up with the kids. And then I thought, well, Axe Cop, who I don't know if you've heard of Axe Cop, but it was basically a 7-year-old who told the stories, but his older sister, she wrote them. She illustrated them. And so it was kind of like a childhood's dream with mature art. And I thought, well, I could do that. I could take my old characters and bring them in, you know, reinvent them a little bit, give them a bit more, you know, detail than I used to have on them. And yes, that's where Ghostmoth came from. Stormguard used to be my old Champions Online character. So did Avenging Arrow. He was my first Champions Online character. And your Captain Athlete. I was going to make a whole comic about Captain Athlete. G.I. Ant, I made him in the 90s. I've put a few of the old comics in with the comic. So that I can show he's been there for a while. These are all characters. So that was the mix-up. I like the idea of mixing a more innocent time with my modern art skills, is what I'm saying.
With G.I. Ant, he's kind of branched out to his own series within the Expanse, which it seems like a new shared universe amongst webcomic creators. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Well, when I was approached to get involved, they needed a character that was going to go up against some pretty tough enemies. And with, I only had a few powerful characters. I don't like to overpower my characters. I think it makes a really dull storytelling, to be honest. And I only had Stormguard, and G.I. Ant was really going to be incredibly powerful. And Stormguard's story hasn't even started yet. So it was G.I. Ant, and I just went for it, really. Yeah, I've altered the story. I mean, from my perspective, Heroes in the World and Beyond is the center focus here, and Giant, the comic, is a spin-off.
Yeah,
Um,
but
eh,
he's kind of a character who can just show up anywhere and acclimate,
well,
survive to the new
yes,
terrain.
I took that idea from something like Wolverine, who you can appear in so many different comics, yet it all sort of ties up in the end. And I just thought, well, if he can be omnipresent in some kind of literary sense, then I can do that with Giant, because the idea with Giant was he was somebody that I would just put in other universes. He was somebody that would show up in anybody's comic, and he could make a guest appearance. He could do a team up, while all the other characters in my story were having the character arcs, especially someone like Stormgod. When Stormgod actually shows himself publicly as Stormgod, I hope this came across in issue 8, then it's going to bring terrible trouble. And he knows this because he's seen the future. So he's very, very scared, or not willing really to become Stormgod, because he knows a lot of people are going to die.
Yeah.
That's his story at the minute. So I couldn't really adapt him, but I would have loved to. I love Stormgod because I designed that costume to be the most bonkers costume ever.
Nice. Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. So yes, Giant is going to team up with 9 other independent creators and their IPs, and we're just going to try and make event level crossovers in indie comics. I mean, it's a bit, I'm not sure if it's been done before. I know the guys know a lot more about the indie comics scene than me. I've very much been in webcomics for the last 6 years.
Yeah.
But I was on board with the idea of making sort of event level crossovers in indie comics, because it's not really being done, and it's not really being, if it is being done, it's not being sold very well. And with the success of the Kickstarter, funded in day one, I think that is just like the indie comics fans saying, yes, this is a good idea. This is something we'd like to see. Yeah. So it's been a lot of positives along the way, and it's been great.
It seems like an incredibly fascinating idea, because there's so much tension between what indie comics purport to be and what event comics that Marvel and DC have been, which is just like they promise that everything's going to change with this event, and
Yes.
it never really sticks. Like Marvel had that arc with Secret Empire, with Cap being replaced by his Nazi doppelganger, and him taking over the world and literally nuking Las Vegas. And but now the old Cap is back, and Las Vegas seems to be fine, and we don't really talk about the presumable millions who got killed.
Well, exactly. I think this is the problem that's big to have, is that they've got franchises. They need to sell the product of Captain America. And when people want to read Captain America comic, they don't want to read Nazi Captain America. Especially, a lot of people, especially myself at the minute, I look at comics, I look at the comic world of the mainstream, and I think, where do I start? I was listening to the history of one of Spider-Man's stories the other day on YouTube, and it was so convoluted, deep, and you needed to read so many different arcs. And I just thought, I'm not surprised people are overwhelmed by it all. So this is why I go into it, keeping it very simple. Yes, it could seem complicated, but I'd never want to overcomplicate things. I do sit there and think comics need to be fun.
Yeah.
Well, I like comics that are fun anyway. and I think there's still a place in the world for that kind of sort of silliness in comics.
There's a place in comics for literally everything. So
yes,
that's
one of the absolute gems of webcomics, and it's something that the mainstream cannot boast, really, is the depth of webcomics. I do my own superhero comic, but I absolutely love the variety that comes with webcomics. You can go anywhere and do anything. I once read one of my favorites, which was called Subternia, I think. And it was just about a bear and a fairy.
Nice.
It was just amazing and lovely. children's book illustrations. It was just fantastic, and I just thought you can't get this anywhere else but with webcomics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite of your characters, who I guess are retooling his story, was Nightwing, who appears to be like a take on the grown-up Robin Nightwing, except with the LGBT subtext around the character becoming very literal text.
It was very difficult to distance him from Nightwing, even though I mean there's definite similarities. The whole idea of the Domino mask was he got it from a joke shop. You know, he's broke. He works in his dad's car shop. He's not an heir to millions. He's actually just a kid, and he's a street level kid. He doesn't even. I mean, he knows kickboxing. He's training at it, but I mean, if Nightwing came along, he would pummel Nightwing. Nightwing would just do a few moves and you'd have him. You know, he's not a superhero. He's just a kid who wants to do good. He sees his LGBT community getting sort of the beatings, and he's going to do something about it. Especially in this more darker world that he lives in, because obviously the police are corrupt and that kind of thing. So it was difficult. I think a lot of people looked at him and saw the Nightwing connections, and I kicked myself for it because I never intended it to happen.
Yeah.
But no, it was kind of like trying to.
It's understandable that you wouldn't want that, and the connection is just like the name and the general figure, but yeah, they are totally different characters.
Fair enough. Yeah. I get it. I thought the storyline really distanced himself from Nightwing, but
it did. I mean, unfortunately, people tend to judge on appearance alone.
Well, people have been trying to compare Giant to Deadpool. Now, I don't like Deadpool, and I don't like Rob Liefeld for reasons.
There are 1,000 reasons not to like Rob Liefeld, starting with his art and going all the way into him getting into NFTs.
Well, I'm not bothered about the art. I think, you know, being in the realm of webcomics, I look at all types of art, and I do think that, you know, you're allowed to have flights of fantasy, and especially in superhero webcomics, but there are other reasons I don't particularly like the guy. But yes, people are associating the look of Giant with Deadpool, and literally I was looking at my characters one day and I just thought, I've got no red superheroes. Oh, Giant will be red.
Yeah.
And that was it. That was my creative process there.
Whatever works.
Yes. Well, you know, what keeps me going is, you know, Master of the Universe is one of my big passions. But even when that went out, even in its first episode on the Filmation cartoon, it was still cooking. They still didn't have things nailed down in the story. And I just think, well, even when you get to that level, you know, and you haven't got things ready, don't worry too much about getting things perfect straight off, especially in webcomics. If you stuff up, you can always retcon or just apologize and say, oh, this is just, you know, I'm stuck here and I need to move on, so I'm going to change this, you know, and your audience will probably be fine. I've never had to do that yet. I've made a few sneaky changes, but nothing too big.
Well, a lot of it is kind of an improv process.
Yes.
So, and as they say in improv, it's always better to go with yes and than no but.
Yeah. But I think what I do feel sorry for a lot of webcomic artists is, you know, we do put just as much time into our webcomics as I would say a YouTuber puts into their productions, but it just seems to be not as celebrated as much. And I'm not feeling sorry for myself. I do think, you know, you're in the driving seat of your own success in that respect. But I just think, you know, there's so many people working so hard, but it's just not celebrated as much. And I want to help promote people. I even did Web Hero Network, which is a Twitter page for superhero webcomics.
Thank you very much for doing that. It's been useful for me.
Well, I thought I would love to help as many people as I can, but I just cannot, with the breadth of webcomics, I just can't concentrate on it all. And obviously I like superhero webcomics, so I'll just promote them, and hopefully other people come along and go, well, that's a good idea. Maybe I can do Magic Girl webcomics, or maybe I can do, fantasy webcomics. But I think you got the type of people who are creative and want to expand, and there are people who just want to do the webcomic and carry on with that, and that's good. It's a good to have a mix.
Yeah. So in the coming months, is there anything we can look forward to from Heroes of the World Beyond and GIN or any other projects cooking?
I actually had made a massive buffer for Heroes of the World and Beyond that's being eaten up at the minute.
Yeah.
I've actually got another year's worth of buffer to go, so I can concentrate on making some of the digital comics. I've completed GIN 2, and that should be coming out in March.
Oh, cool.
And I'm currently working on Nightwing. I'm going to publish that myself. I'll probably put that up through an independent shop, and hopefully people will like it. It'll be a lot more cohesive than the webcomic was. I'll try and make it, because I think I was getting a bit too sort of excited about making so many different stories.
Yeah, well,
in the
learning
one.
process and all.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I look forward to those, and you all in the audience should too. You can check out Shane's work in the links below. Here's the World Beyond and GIN with the Expanse. And as always, if you like what you've heard here, like and subscribe. Thank you for coming on, Shane.
Thank you very much, Neil.